ask questions as feel free to ask questions as Casey goes along. You can either raise your hand on Zoom, unmute, or put something in the chat, and I can be monitoring that. But we'll hand it off to Casey. Go ahead.
Hi, y'all. Yeah, feel free to interrupt with questions. We're going to go on like a whole journey today for pollinator things. And so, yeah, please jump in if you have any questions. Okay, so first thing to talk about is habitat. What is habitat? There are four main things that make up habitat. And so when you're thinking about creating your pollinator garden, you want to create a habitat for the pollinators, right? So food, water, shelter, and space. And habitat has a lot of different scales, right? And so if you think about me as a human and my habitat, there's sort of varying levels of it. So my habitat is my bed, my favorite habitat. Then my house also is my habitat, right? My neighborhood. And then depending on sort of my mobility, right? Like, do I have a car? Do I have a bike? Am I walking places? This isn't on here, but if I fly, right? Like my habitat, can be, a neighborhood or a state or the country or the world, right? And so that's what that space piece is. Food, water, shelter, and space is really that like physical area that an animal needs. And so the reason this is important, like why do we want to create a piece of habitat for pollinators, is for this habitat connectivity. So if you look at the valley as a whole, we have a lot of cool outdoor space, but it's all sort of fragmented with the urban environment. So if you can see here, you can almost think about these different pieces of habitat as little islands, right? And so for especially larger animals, they're using these almost like habitat islands, but they need the connection piece between them. I saw someone was doing a study at ASU saying that coyotes are using the canal paths as like a point of habitat connectivity, which is super cool. And so it can be as big as the valley or as small as a neighborhood. And another thing to point out too is that typically larger animals need more space, right? So if you think of maybe a mountain lion, they're going to need a lot more space because they're hunting for, rabbits to eat. Water sources, right? They need a lot more water than like a bumblebee. And so they're actually going to need to probably be looking for pools or lakes versus an animal that's smaller, like a bee. They can get water from a flower or from a puddle. So obviously this isn't a universal rule. If you think about monarchs, right? Like they're migrating way more. And so they need thousands of miles of space. But when we think of pollinators generally, we really can think on a pretty small scale. So when you think about creating your habitat, you have to think really local. And this is why. This is Alaska Annie and Florida Fanny, and they're going to demonstrate to us why thinking local is really important for our habitats. So Alaska Annie and Florida Fanny are going to go visit each other. They have each grown up in their respective states, and they have come up with their own adaptations to live in their states, right? So Alaska Annie has her snow boots, she has her sweaters, she has her hats. Florida Fanny has her beach gear, right? Like she's ready to go. So they're traveling and they are coming to this new location with the adaptations, the tools that they have developed living in their home states. When they get to each other's states, obviously the tools, the adaptations that they had in their prior states are not effective, right? And so in the same way, all organisms adapt and have tools that are specific to their environment. So this is on a population level. So I think a really good example is we have this wild daisy here. It's called spreading fleabane. Look it up later, super cute. It's a species that you can find in, I want to say it's like from, our level of elevation, like 0, 100 feet elevation. I don't actually know how high we are in elevation, all the way to Flagstaff, right? So like 7,800 elevation. So, but that's the whole species, right? The population is that little group in Flagstaff, or like that little plant in Phoenix. And so if you take that plant from Flagstaff and you bring it down to Phoenix, it is not going to be adapted to our heat, to our precipitation, and vice versa. And so this idea of local adaptation is really that plants that are grown in their home environment are better adapted for that environment. They're likely going to be bigger, they're going to have larger leaves, and they're probably going to have more flowers, which is very important for our pollinators. And the way this happens is just because different environments have different selection pressures. So these can be temperature, precipitation, soil pH, competition, right? Like there really are a lot of factors that go into how a plant or animal survives in its environment. And pollinators are a selection pressure, right? There's a lot of research that shows how pollinators and plants have co-evolved. And so there are a lot of times specific pollinators that correlate with our specific plants, or I guess in our case, we want the specific plants that correlate with our specific pollinators. There's a lot of really great examples of this, and it goes down to like there are plants that have little UV like track pads that insects can see because they can see ultraviolet light, some insects. Flower shape, flower scent. Again, this is a whole rabbit hole you can go down of like this coevolution, but it's really interesting and really cool. So now that we've talked about why local is important, we're going to talk about some of our local pollinators. This is a picture of my dog, Emma. She is not an effective pollinator. However, anything that can carry pollen from one flower to another technically can be a pollinator. So we're not going to write her off the list completely. This is our cute friend, the honeybee. This is who people always think about first when they think about pollinators, is like saving the bees, right? We love our honeybee. They're a domestic species. They're really important for our agriculture. That is not who we're talking about today. This is not who we're building our local pollinator garden for. We love the bees, very important. Beekeeping is super cool. Not what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about a bunch of local pollinators, but we're going to focus specifically on native bees. We have a huge biodiversity of native bees. Like we have, I think, the most bee species in the world in Arizona, other than there's like one area in the Middle East. So we're really blessed and lucky that we have this incredible bee biodiversity. Like it's really cool. We're in a really unique spot. And people from, bee researchers come to Arizona to see this. So we're just going to run through some of our little bee friends, so you can see really the magnificent biodiversity that we have here. Sweat bees, they're really small. A lot of them are like I would think they were an ant before I knew them. Cuckoo bees, they kind of look like wasps, but they are in fact bees. Our leafcutter and mason bees, they're so cute. They have these really hairy bellies, and that's what collects the pollen. So you can kind of see them as they're like, rolling around in the flowers. They collect pollen on their belly. It's very cute. Cactus bees, if you go up to a prickly pear flower or a prickly pear plant sometime in the spring, you'll probably see a cactus bee. Longhorn bees, super cool. Carpenter bees, I feel like everyone's really familiar with these. I called them black bees as a kid, and I was terrified of them because they're really big and really noisy, but so cute. Digger bees, you'll find these on the ground. And actually, I think Ashley, who's on the call, helped me take this picture of a little digger bee in my front yard when we were planting a tree. Bumblebees, we love them, super fuzzy. If you want to be a beekeeper and you want to keep native bees, most of our native bees are solitary, so you can't like have a beehive. However, bumblebees are hive bees. They don't make honey, I don't think, but you can look up. There's a USDA guide of how you can be a bumblebee keeper if you wanted to, which is kind of a dream. And then the last category is squash and gourd bees. I love these pictures. I love the bees like looking out of the flower. And then these are just some pictures of bees that I've taken. And you can see like this one on the left is a tiny little sweat bee, really, really small. And then all the way to the one on the right is our classic carpenter bee. So bees, again, are sort of what we think of when we think of pollinators, to save the bees. But we have a lot of other pollinators. Butterflies, we have an incredible biodiversity of butterflies here. Moths, all somewhat underappreciated, but we also have a really awesome biodiversity of moths here. And then other arthropods are also pollinators. So flies, wasps, beetles, even like true bugs like aphids. The assassin bug on the upper right is a true bug. So again, like people, you think of flies and you're like, ew, gross. Beetles you wouldn't necessarily think of, but all of these are really important pollinators. And just a side note, this in the lower right is how you can tell the difference between a bee, a fly, and a wasp. If you get close enough to look at their face, which I know if you don't want to hang out with bees, like you probably don't want to get that close. But the eyes between flies and bees are a really big giveaway. Flies have these like kind of ridiculously large eyes, and bees' eyes do not look like that. So anyway, just a fun little tidbit. And vertebrates can be pollinators too. So birds, bats, lizards, mice, all of these things, if they can carry pollen from one plant to another, specifically, or especially if they are eating parts of the flower, if they're eating the nectar, they can be pollinators. So lots of pollinators to think about when we're building our garden. Does anybody have any pollinator questions before we move on to talking about some plants? Okay, cool. So we've met the guests we want to invite to our garden. Let's talk about some plants. When we're talking about plants for our garden, typically we're thinking about the little bee or the little butterfly that's going to come land and suck up some nectar and then fly away. But plants have a larger range of purposes for pollinators. So for food, obviously nectar plants is sort of what probably we're all thinking of. The bee, the butterfly, the bird coming up and sucking nectar, pollen as well. But host plants are also really important for caterpillars. They need to eat the leaves, the stems, the roots. Bees also will eat some of these parts. And so when we're thinking about putting out plants for our pollinators, we have to accept that there might be some holes in our leaves, right? And like that's why we're putting them there, is we want these plants to be food for sort of multiple pollinators at different stages of their lives. And then also these foods or these plants serve as shelter. So butterflies and moths, if they lay their eggs there, if they pupate, so if they create their cocoon there, that's a form of shelter, right? Thinking back to our habitat, all the forms of habitat that are needed. Solitary bees will often sort of hide in some of these plants. If you see plants that look like this specifically, so you see these like sort of really almost perfect half circles cut out of leaves, that's from our leaf cutter bees. And so they'll actually roll that up and put it in a little hole, and that's where they lay their young. So in this quantity, it's not going to harm your plant overall. And just know that your little leaf cutter bees are using that to make nests for their babies. Very cute. And then also overwintering. So a lot of insects will slow down over the winter. And so having plant space, also leaf litter space that they can sort of have shelter is really important. So typically when we're talking about plants in our pollinator garden, we're thinking of wildflowers. This is the one that the City of Tempe, we really plant a lot of this in our right of ways, especially the desert milkweed. And forbs are sort of the scientific technical term for these. So again, thinking about our traditional, when I think of a pollinator garden, I'm going to think of these wildflowers as sort of my first go-to. But sort of all of the plant groups are important. So we already talked about our cactus bees. Obviously, we need to have cactuses for our cactus bees. Trees, shrubs, these are all really important, and different types of insect or different types of pollinators will use different types of plants. Native grasses are also really, I think, the unsung heroes of our native plants. They're not something that people normally give a second thought to, but they're also really important for pollinators, especially those ground dwelling bees. A lot of times they will eat sort of the roots and shoots of these grasses. So next time you see a native grass, tell it hi and that you appreciate it. So it's a lot of types of plants, a lot of types of pollinators. So where do you even start, looking at your patch of potential pollinator habitat? The resource that I recommend going to is the Maricopa Native Seed Library. They have all of these plant profiles. So we talked about all the different plant types, right? Like wildflowers, shrubs, trees, grasses, vines. You can see all of the plant profiles here. Even stuff like best plants for containers. If you really want to attract butterflies specifically or hummingbirds specifically, all of those are there. And they also have native seeds that you can get for free from the Maricopa County Community College libraries. So these are currently the 5 libraries that have those seeds. You can get 3 seed packets a month, no library card needed. So if you're looking for a place to start, maybe like a low cost startup of your garden, right? Go to that website, go pick up some native seeds. This is a great place to start. And the Center for Native and Urban Wildlife at Scottsdale Community College also does have biannual plant sales that you can go to as well, all focusing on natives. The Desert Botanical Garden also obviously has their plant sale, and we'll talk about other great places to get native plants in a minute. And then in terms of, let's say you have gotten your native seeds, right? Like you're getting started, and you really want to cover all your bases with a pollinator microhabitat. Again, the Maricopa Native Seed Library has this Pollinator Pathway program. It's free to participate, and it's really pretty simple. 4 to 6 hours of sunlight per day. You don't want to disturb the soil unless you're planting, and that's because of those little ground dwelling bees we talked about. Some maintenance requirements, so removing invasives, you're not using pesticides, and we talked about like letting the caterpillars eat the leaves, right? Like that's what you put it there for, is so those caterpillars can grow up to become butterflies or moths. And you can have as little as 5 plants. So you want to have nectar year round, and so that's spring plant, summer plant, fall plant, and a winter plant. So no matter what time of year a pollinator comes and visits your garden, there will be nectar available. And then the desert milkweed, because monarchs are such a strong conservation effort right now, that's who that desert milkweed is for. You can also, it's free to participate, it's free to get put on the map and get certified. You can also buy one of these signs at cost to put in your yard to show your neighbors that you have a cool pollinator pathway. And you don't actually need a yard, right? Like we're talking micro habitats. And so you don't need a ton of space to do this. You can build your habitat on your doorstep. You can build your habitat on your balcony or on your patio. And if you do have a yard, you can build it in your yard. And the reason why these micro habitats are so important is it goes back to that habitat connectivity piece, right? So if I have a patio and I can put 5 potted plants out, it might not feel like I'm making a huge difference, right? Like I'm like, this in itself isn't going to draw a ton of bees, a ton of butterflies. Why is this important? And it is that habitat connectivity piece. So if you're a bee or a butterfly, and you're trying to travel from, one nesting site to the next, having these habitat stopovers is really important. And so as we create our own microhabitats, on our patios, in our yards. It really builds this larger connected network so that our pollinators, have places to go when they're traveling across the valley. So in terms of getting these plants, we talked about the Maricopa Native Seed Library. There's a ton of awesome nurseries that you can get native plants from. The Desert Botanical Garden, obviously, where CAZCA is housed out of. They have stuff year round, but are they biannual plant sales? Or like quarterly? Biannual?
Semi-annual,
Okay, cool, cool,
semi.
cool. So those are amazing plant sales. The Center for Native and Urban Wildlife, as I mentioned. Native Seed Search is not here in the valley. They're actually down in Tucson, but you can get seeds mailed to you here in the valley. Ocotillo Joe is another great resource local to Tempe, focusing on ocotillos and saguaros and other cactuses. And then if you want to go on a little road trip, Spadefoot Nursery down in Tucson has a ton of native and desert adapted plants. I also highly recommend following them on socials. They always have just really good information. And they're really good about posting, which I don't know how they do it all because it's like a 2-person team. Borderlands Nursery and Seed is down in Patagonia. You can also get seeds from them shipped to you, or you can go down to their nursery. They also do plant drop-offs. So occasionally you can pre-order and they'll bring a truck full of plants up to the valley. I know they've done ones down in like Chandler. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Boyce Thompson Arboretum, I want to say right down the road. It's kind of right down the road. And Desert Survivors down in Tucson is another great one. So we have a lot of really awesome local resources to source these native plants from. And if you want to learn more about native plants, if you want more information on selecting your plant types, or if you're looking for something specific, if you really want to focus on those invertebrates, if you really want to focus on those birds, these are some other great resources that have plant lists, they have events, they have publications, and just really awesome resources where you can learn more. And people often think, oh, I can do a pollinator garden or I can do a vegetable garden. That is not the case. There are tons of native plants that are edible. This is a great starting point. And by starting point, I mean, it's an entire like 2-pound cookbook for native plants that are edible. This is from Desert Harvesters. A lot of our native trees are edible. Obviously, people are most familiar with like our prickly pear fruit, our tunas. Cactus fruit is edible. We also have local berries. We have local seeds. We have local herbs. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. If you really want to be growing a garden that you can eat from, you can do both. You can focus on those native plants that are going to support those native pollinators and get something yummy to eat at the same time. And finally, because this is the Conservation Alliance, I wanted to share some resources. I know that for a lot of us, we don't have a ton of money to be going and buying a ton of plants and upgrading our landscape. But if you live in a municipality in the valley, your city or town probably has resources available to you. These are just sort of our neighbor cities here in the Tempe area and an example of some of the resources that they have available. Really, any of your municipalities are going to have some sort of conservation rebate. Every city is sort of organized differently in where you might find some of this stuff, but water conservation is a great place to start. Every city is going to have a water conservation department, and that's usually where you're going to find the stuff like the irrigation rebates, the lawn conversion rebates, stuff like that. SRP and APS also have tree and shade programs. So trees tend to be among the more expensive plants that we want to put in our yard. So those are great resources, and they serve pollinators as well as helping cool your yard and probably reduce your energy bill. And just talking free money, I also wanted to throw in some stuff about energy efficiency. Our department does green urban cooling, so plants and stuff, but I also have some great teammates that focus on energy. And it's all a big piece of the conservation puzzle. So here are some great resources for energy efficiency in your home as well. If you're really getting on a conservation kick and want to do up the outdoors and the indoors. There's stuff about LED lights, dual pane windows, other stuff. See, this is why I'm on the green team. That's as much as I can think of, but lots of really great stuff there. And that is it for me. Does anybody have any questions?
And if anybody has questions, feel free to unmute yourself. We'd be happy to make this an open conversation.
I would just like to say thank you to Kaci for doing
Oh,
this.
it's Harry. Hi, Harry.
Hi. I think
Amwa's here, man.
I think as
Wow,
well.
big
I'm
wigs.
not with AMWA anymore.
Oh, you're at ASU now, right?
Yeah, but I think it's really important that this opportunity exists, and I'm really glad that you took this on. I think it's a really important topic. So thank you, and
Sure.
thank you, CAZCA.
Kaci, what is your favorite pollinator plant and why?
I'm gonna say globe mallows, and I think specifically because one of my favorite things on this planet is to like roll up to a globe mallow and see a little bee taking a nap in one of the flowers. Like they're just really, it just really, touches my heart. And also, like, who doesn't want to be a little bee taking a nap in a flower? That sounds dreamy.
That is the ideal. We also have a question in the chat from Judy Ann. Does Tempe check the milkweed for caterpillars?
That is a really good question. So we are actually starting to do more of our monitoring of our right-of-way plants. So it's pretty cool. Actually, our right-of-way department, which if you don't know what a right-of-way is, I definitely didn't. It's just the strip of land that is either in the median or along the side of the road. And we just the right-of-way landscaping program just joined the sustainability team, which is really exciting. So we're going to start doing more monitoring of those milkweeds that are planted there. I'm also hoping that we can at some point start doing some cool citizen science stuff around some of our city-owned land, the parks, the right-of-way, stuff like that. Not the medians. We don't need people taking pictures of plants in the middle of the street, but
Safety first. Oh. Anyone else have any other questions about pollinators?
Did you mention Monarch Watch, Kaci? I'm sorry if I missed that part.
I did not. And I'm glad you just said that because I was also thinking that the Central Arizona Butterfly Association would be a good thing for people to check out if they like butterflies specifically.
Yeah, and let's see. So Monarch Watch, you can sign up to be a monarch way station if you have a plant that is specific to that species, and then you can also join their community science project and reporting when you see caterpillars and butterflies, and it's a lot of fun, especially if you have kids, to get them involved in a science like that and get them outdoors. It looks like there's more questions in the chat. Mary,
Oh,
I'll
okay.
grab the Monarch Watch info and drop it in the chat.
Yeah, so we have, is there any plan to add more medians with plants in Tempe?
Yeah, so there's a few different projects going on. So if you live in Tempe or commute through Tempe, you've probably seen these big streetscape projects where there's updates going in for street safety and landscaping, stuff like that. So in the sustainability side, we're really starting to partner more with the transportation side. I think it's Miller Road, that's sort of North Scottsdale, for example. A lot of residents have asked for traffic calming measures. And so we're partnering with the transportation side to put in planter bump out. So they don't actually go into the traffic lane, but they come close enough that people slow down. And so we're doing some more stuff like that. If there's right of way, or not right of ways, what's the thing that people don't like? The roundabouts. Yeah, thank you. If roundabouts go in, you know, we're focusing, and we really are shifting in our department towards more native plants, if at all possible. There are some areas that, especially for trees, things like Palo Verdes and mesquites can be really messy. So people sometimes don't like having those in the roads or the parking lots. But yeah.
And then one other question, what kind of data are you collecting when monitoring pollinators?
So I can speak to a study that I was a part of back in grad school. And it was using sort of some citizen science guides. In the city of Tempe, we don't do any sort of pollinator monitoring, although we are starting to inventory pollinator plants. But if you're doing some sort of like pollinator citizen science, we would take data on how many flowers a bee is visiting, or a butterfly or a beetle. We also timed how long they spent on each flower. We looked at the different types. So again, we talked about that sort of matching or the pairing of different pollinator types to the flowers. So we would notice that, for example, like the leafcutter bees really were drawn to this one particular flower, whereas we saw a lot more flies on this other type of flower. So yeah. If that didn't answer your question and you have a different, are looking for more information, let me know.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions about micropollinator habitats? How to create them? Well, if not, I think we'll thank Kaci so much. I learned a lot. I saved the site from Maricopa Libraries, I think it was, because I had no idea about that. That's so cool that you can get free seeds at all those places. Um, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Kaci. That was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for everyone that joined us. I know it's later in the afternoon, but I'm glad you all made it, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Kaci.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Shallie, do you want to stop the recording?
Yeah.